Welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast, brought to you by Association Activision. We ask you to join us to discuss the future of the Association's community. How can we build and focus on the many futures we will see during these disruptive times? Let's get started with today's guest.
Welcome, friends, to today's Association Futures Podcast. Today's guest is Erin Weeks. Erin is an organizational leader skilled in organization-wide program creation and adoption. Erin is experienced in recruitment, retention, and adoption. Erin also works with a hands-on, data-driven approach to organizational analysis, goal setting, real-time research, and measuring effectiveness. In addition to her certified association executive from ASAE, she has an MA in International Relations and International Economics from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. She's worked abroad as an assistant language teacher in Japan, an intern with the Institute of Energy Economics Japan, and conducted open source research on Japanese nuclear policy. Erin works with the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, QEDC. I had to learn to say that, it's a difficult one, which is managed by SRI International. QED is a consortium aimed at enabling and growing the quantum industry. It was established with support from the National Institute of Standards and Technologies as part of the federal strategy for advancing quantum information science. Its mission is to enable and grow a robust commercial quantum-based industry and associated supply chain in the United States. Erin says she enjoys making great things with great people. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was a fantastic introduction. I feel quite honored.
It's easy to do when you have good people on the other side. Erin, help us understand exactly what QED Consortium does and how it advances the everyday life of people.
Well, that's a good question. So first of all, we call ourselves QEDC. We don't say consortium generally. It's just part of it's a joke, right? Quod erat demonstratum. And part of it's because Quantum Economic Development Consortium makes us sound a little bit like a local or regional economic development organization. So QEDC, affectionately. And what we do to help advance the everyday lives of people is we are trying to create a technology that is, I shouldn't say create, we're trying to bring quantum information science technologies from the lab and to something that is transformative, practical, and common for everyday life. So essentially, we're trying to not make it necessarily something that you, as an individual, would own, but quantum technologies have the capability of influencing and improving areas such as healthcare, mineral geology. I was like, mineral science? That doesn't make any sense. Geology, geophysics, space systems. I'm trying to think, computing to a degree. It has all sorts of ramifications if the technology can make it out of the lab and sort of this initial research and beginning application stage into that commercial space, into what industry can use it for to then help the average person not have access necessarily, but have it influence lives.
It's really good to understand these principles and organizational positions because they're fancy words to the average person.
Yes, they are.
But QEDC does what it does, and thanks for telling us a little bit more about what the work of QEDC is. And how does that relate to SRI International?
So SRI is a 501c3 research and development corporation, and QEDC was called for originally as a consortium in the National Quantum Initiative Act of 2018. And I may get my dates wrong, to which I may also get scolded, but we're going to go with 2018. So it was called for as something for NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, I hope, to set up. And NIST had proposed this consortium, and SRI took it on as a project. So QEDC operates underneath SRI's project umbrella, and it's sort of fitting, right? Quantum is a nascent industry. It needs a bit of an incubator, and SRI is providing that sort of incubation support for an association before this industry has come to sort of maturity.
Well, like I said a few moments ago, I think it's important for those of us who are not so scientifically inclined or research oriented to understand the importance that organizations like yours are bringing to our everyday lives and trying to make it something that serves the best interests of our citizens in the country. So, as an association professional in membership and volunteer management, what do you see as the major risks and opportunities for professional societies in membership development and retention?
Well, that's a hard one. You don't throw softballs, do you?
I try not to.
So for me, at least, what I see is there's a lack of awareness. And I think any association professional will tell you that generally, unless you're in the field and know that the association exists, there's this lack of connection, I would say, between the average person on the street to this wide world of membership. And there's, as the common phrase goes, there's an association for everything, literally everything, right? And sometimes you don't think about that because you're invested in your profession or your career. And you can also translate associations into unions, into societies, into sororities. So there's a wider application of the phrase than I think your average person might recognize. In terms of risks to the membership development as a whole, the association world as a whole, there's, again, that lack of awareness. I think that social media provides both an opportunity and a challenge. It's an opportunity because we can get the word out to more people. It's a challenge because people don't need us to get access to information. And that's what associations were commonly used for, right? They came together to forward and improve a mission or in pursuit of a vision with a common objective or goal. If that information that they are used to providing becomes widespread, then there's, I don't want to say less need, but there's a need to create a different value, right? Or to provide that in a different manner so that the people who should be part of your organization to support that mission and vision actually join rather than act as lurkers, I suppose is about the best term I have. I feel very outdated using that term, but we're gonna roll with it.
You know, it's interesting what you're talking about here because the value of organizations like yours is not only do they bring information and data, but it can be trusted information and data because it's research based. And we all know that in this wild and crazy social media world that we live in, you might get information, but you might have to check whether or not you got the whole story or 100% the truth. And that's why we value the professional societies and the work of research-based institutions like your own.
Right. I would say that, yes, we're not, and I don't know if Microsoft would strike this, we're not ChatGPT, right? So it's not, in theory, we have fact check, and in practice, we do fact check, and we try to take into account all viewpoints as much as possible before publishing so that it does become, and one of the things QEDC personally, QEDC itself holds as a standard for itself is that trusted nature of the community. What we say is maybe not the entirety of the situation, but it is as best we know. It is representative of the situation as we currently perceive it.
Yeah, which is so very important to our understanding as average citizens, typical citizens, about what's going on in this new and fascinating world that we're in. Now, one of the other interesting things I think about QEDC is that you are a worldwide community. It's not just within the, even though you have a particular mission associated here in the United States, you are worldwide because that's the nature of what you're dealing with here. So what challenges does this worldwide nature hold for you? And how do you think international societies need to think about this issue, particularly as it relates to security interests and those related categories of things?
Well, I mean, I think you've answered you've answered your question to some degree, right? There's definitely, in terms of the risks associated, security is a concern. Quantum technologies is one of, I think, 4 or 5 enabling technologies, or not enabling, emerging technologies that the US government has, mentioned as being high priorities. That includes AI. And we all know AI is a buzzword. From the perspective of the first part of your question, right? What QEDC is, because it is essentially an industry association, right? We're not quite there yet, and we're still very much a startup, so we're still really learning about what it means to bring people together, create programs that are meaningful. As an industry, it's not just about that end product, right? It's about everything from the person who has a thought in their head to how they get the materials to make the product, to how that product then gets applied by the end users, to then how the end users might then influence your daily lives, right? So we have to think holistically. And as we've seen with semiconductors and other key technologies and key enabling technologies, semiconductors again, supply chain's a risk. So there's that element of, where is it being manufactured? Who is manufacturing it? Do I have access to the raw materials? And by working with organizations and companies who are members across the globe, to some extent, QEDC is open to membership by 39 countries. We're not entirely global yet. And so we are trying to take that measured approach based upon security. We want to work together, right? And there's always, also because there's always that possibility that somebody somewhere else may develop a technology in one of these countries that is useful to then furthering our technologies in the US or furthering the global quantum ability. And you want to stay abreast of that. So QEDC, to do that, not only opens itself to membership, we are also part of the International Council of Quantum Industry Associations, which is also a risk, right? Because you have these pretty much major countries and major regions have quantum-based organizations, or sort of this with the same mission and the same goals to some extent that QEDC does, which means that we not only work together in cooperation, we are to some degree competing for the same membership in different, maybe primarily in different spheres, right? If you're, and I'm going to just take this as an example, if you're company A and you operate in the US and in Germany, you might get benefit from joining both consortiums in the US and Germany. But if you're just in Germany and you want to see what's going on internationally, maybe it's good to join QEDC, and maybe it's good to stay with just your local consortium because they'll have attracted other industry from outside of Germany. So it becomes right? It's sort of, you want to work together. We're all pursuing the same mission and essentially the same mission. You just want to do it better.
Yeah.
And I hope nobody's listeing to that who give me
Well,
problems.
actually, I think your answer demonstrates something I talked about in your introduction, which is that you view the membership and the mission in the context of a data-driven approach to organizational analysis. And that's exactly what you just did. Well, there's many things that embrace it. You
Right.
know, one of the interesting things for me is a phrase that I often reverse, and that's the phrase that the world's shrinking. You know, they
Mm,
always talk about how it's getting smaller. I actually think sometimes when I hear about the work that you're involved in and QEDC is involved in, I think of it just in reverse, that actually all of our worlds are getting larger. We have to consider, you know, others in the playing field. We have
mm.
to consider that they have interests that maybe are a little different than our interest, and so forth and so. So our world is expanding because you just can't, you know, there's no way to put up a wall to find some way of walling off, if you would, just the way we do it, you know, because that's the nature of these new technologies.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. And that was my uh my background's international relations. You said it yourself. Like that's where I've got my master's degree in, is in that perspective. And you have to think about those things, both the macro and the micro. So,
I think I read that you're fluent in Japanese. Is that correct?
I mean, 10 years ago, I haven't had much of an opportunity to practice it, although I did just visit a Japanese bookstore so that I could buy myself some books that are to practice, right? So if I could buy myself some Japanese books so that I can go read again.
Well, I think Japan is a fascinating culture that we in the United States should take a look at in a kind of positive way. You know, it's very different than the way we see things, and they're good people. And I don't speak one word of Japanese unless you include the word sushi.
You speak several words of Japanese.
I do.
Arigato. You
Uh-huh.
know, there's the song Domo Arigato, Mr.
Right.
Roboto.
All right.
Um,
I hadn't thought of that. That's right.
I'm gonna bet that you've seen Nissan
These
and
are,
Toyota, right? Those
maybe,
are Japanese names.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Uh, and if you've ever listened to this is a bit of a secret, not really, but I got into Japanese through several routes, right? Several things pointed me to East Asia and Japan in particular. And one of them was there used to be a series of movies called Big Bird Goes to Japan, or like Big Bird Goes to, right? They were travel-based movies,
Yeah.
and they demonstrated generally myths, right? They talked a little bit about culture, but they also talked a little bit about a myth that that region was associated with. Well, Big Bird Goes to Japan. And he learns a song called Ohio High, which is Ohio means good morning. So it's really Ohio High.
Ah, very
Uh,
good. Very good.
so
Yeah.
you know several words of Japanese, you just don't think about them in that context.
Well, kind of typical American, you know. We speak English and we wonder why everybody else doesn't. I shouldn't go down that road too far. Uh, now, one more question before we wrap up today, and that's, you know, because you're into the research end of this thing.
Mhm.
How do you go about measuring the effectiveness of your membership efforts? And what would you recommend in general to the association community in terms of how to measure effectiveness as you build membership and expand, you know, your audience?
So you're asking all of me all of the hard questions.
That
I'm just going to
I
refer back to my answer about that we're still a startup and we're still really exploring what it means to be an association. For QEDC, there's a couple of ways that we look at membership and membership effectiveness. For instance, the number of times QEDC might get referenced. I think a lot of associations find that fairly common, right? In terms of publications or news media, uh, government references. Again, we have fairly close ties. NIST is our sponsoring organization to a degree, right? We're sort of founded by them, so they work closely with them. And so the number of times we appear or ask for advice or provide input onto something that is policy based is certainly part of our effectiveness. I would also say we just ran a survey about for membership value and needs to discover, how did somebody come to hear about us, and you know, what was that introduction point? And I would say 70% said it was a colleague or a coworker who introduced them to QEDC. Now, QEDC is just we're an organizational membership. So our members are 99% companies, universities, federally funded research and development corporations, so large scale institutions. And so we have to measure membership in two ways. One is not just the number of members that we have in terms of the organization, but also the number of people we have reached inside of those organizations. And that scale becomes a little harder. So currently what we look at are the number of people who subscribe to our newsletter, and the number of people who've requested access to the members site to give us some idea of how effective are we, while also recognizing that scale can be anything from a one-person shop, right, all the way to an employer that employs 100,000 plus people. So,
and those are opt-ins, right? They have to opt in to receive your material.
Correct. We try to follow as best as possible, right? Privacy and privacy laws, GDPR. I think Maryland's privacy law either is going into effect.
California, Massachusetts.
Right. There's a lot of them.
Right.
And so we utilize double opt-in. It's not just enough to tell us, click that I want to receive information. You have to then tell us again that, yes, I know I really do want to receive this information. And the same thing with the member site. We do checks on that. There are some limitations, but we open it to if you are fully employed. So if you are, what in the US would be a W-2 employee of a member organization, QEDC welcomes you, which is an amazing concept to me because I come from a professional association background, but it's also the sort of mind-blowing, well, then how do I target people to volunteer? And how do I target people to act on certain things? And how do I know that I'm reaching the right person?
Well, it's an old phrase, but the only constant is change. And our conversation really demonstrates that today. And I want to thank you for being kind enough to join us for today's session on Association Futures podcast. Apparently, QEDC is on the road to being one of those really interesting, new forward-thinking enterprises. And I wish you and the organization our very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. This was fun.
My pleasure. Have a great day now.